Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Today we're heading to London on December 11th, 1936, the day King Edward VIII formally signed the Instrument of Abdication, giving up the British throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. This wasn't just a romantic story about a king choosing love. This was a constitutional crisis that forced Britain to confront fundamental questions about duty, personal happiness, and what we expect from people who serve public roles. Understanding what really happened and the impossible position Edward was in teaches us something important about the conflict between individual desire and institutional obligation, and whether there are times when personal happiness should take precedence over duty. Picture this. It's December 11th, 1936, and King Edward VIII is sitting at a desk in Fort Belvedere, his country retreat outside London. He's been king for less than a year, just 326 days, and he's about to sign a document that no British monarch has ever signed voluntarily. An abdication. He's giving up the throne, breaking the constitutional understanding that monarchs serve for life, all to marry the woman he loves. The document is simple. It declares that he renounces the throne for himself and his descendants. His brother Albert will become King George VI. Edward will leave England, become the Duke of Windsor, and marry Wallis Simpson. The throne, the duty, the obligation that was supposed to define his entire life, he's walking away from all of it. Here's the thing that I always wonder about. What was going through his mind as he signed? Because this wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was the culmination of months of crisis, pressure, negotiation, and anguish. He knew what he was giving up. He knew how he'd be judged. But he also knew he couldn't be the king everyone wanted and have the life he wanted. Something had to give. Let me build the clock for you, because understanding why this was a crisis and why Edward made the choice he did requires examining how monarchy actually works as an institution and what happens when personal desire collides with constitutional duty. Think about it this way. Edward VIII became king when his father, George V, died in January 1936. He was 41 years old, popular, modern, charismatic, but he'd already been in a relationship with Wallis Simpson for several years. She was American, sophisticated, witty, and twice divorced, with both ex-husbands still living. Here's what the evidence tells us. This was a constitutional problem. The king was supreme governor of the Church of England. The church didn't recognize divorce. For the king to marry a divorced woman, especially one with two living ex-husbands, would put him in direct conflict with the institution he theoretically headed. It would require him to either change the church doctrine or defy it. Neither option was acceptable to the establishment. But here's where it gets more complicated. This wasn't just about church rules. The British monarchy is a constitutional institution with specific roles and limitations. The king reigns but doesn't rule. He needs the support of Parliament, the government, and ultimately the people. If the king's personal life creates a constitutional crisis, if Parliament won't support him, if the dominions threaten to break away, then the system breaks down. Think about the machinery they were trying to operate. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin represented the government's position. The Archbishop of Canterbury described the church. The dominions, Canada, Australia, South Africa, had their own opinions about whether their king should marry a divorced American. Public opinion was divided. The media had been mostly silent about the relationship, but by late 1936, the story was breaking worldwide. Edward proposed solutions. What if Wallis could be his wife, but not queen? What if it was a morganatic marriage, where she'd have a lesser title and their children wouldn't inherit the throne? But Baldwin and the cabinet rejected these compromises. Parliament wouldn't support it. The Dominions wouldn't accept it. The options narrowed to two: give up Wallis or give up the throne. I find myself thinking about the position Edward was in. From his perspective, he'd found the person he wanted to spend his life with. He was 41, not a naive young man. He'd had relationships before. This was different. He loved Wallis Simpson. She made him happy in ways the royal roll-throwers never had. Why should he have to sacrifice that? Why should personal happiness always take a backseat to duty? But from the establishment's perspective, he wasn't just a man. He was the king. He'd inherited a role, a constitutional function, an institution that was bigger than him. The monarchy wasn't his personal property. It belonged to the nation. He had obligations. Duty came first. Personal desires were secondary. That was the bargain. That was what kingship meant. Now here's where my investigator's training becomes crucial. The popular narrative, the romantic story of a king giving up everything for love, is incomplete. The evidence shows a more complex reality. Edward wasn't just a romantic hero. He was also politically naive, sometimes petulant, and not particularly interested in the duties of kingship. He admired aspects of fascism. He'd later meet with Hitler, to the British government's horror. His judgment was questionable in ways beyond just his choice of wife. And Wallis Simpson wasn't just an innocent woman caught up in events. She was ambitious, socially calculating, and by some accounts, not particularly eager to cause a constitutional crisis. She may have preferred to be the king's mistress, with influence, but without the scrutiny that came with being his wife. The evidence suggests the abdication may not have been entirely what she wanted either. Think about what this reveals about how we tell stories. We want the romantic narrative. King gives up throne for love, how beautiful, how tragic. But the reality was messier. Edward wanted to be king and have Wallis. Wallis may have wanted to be with Edward without causing him to abdicate. The establishment wanted Edward to do his duty without complaint. Nobody got exactly what they wanted. We're still facing versions of this same conflict today, and I think this is where the story gets especially relevant for us, right now. Look at how we think about public service, duty, and personal happiness. When should individuals sacrifice their personal desires for institutional roles? When does duty become an unreasonable burden? And who gets to decide where the line is? Here's what fascinates me. The abdication crisis established that personal happiness can be a legitimate reason to step away from duty. Edward's choice said, "I'm a human being first, a king second. If I can't be happy in this role, I shouldn't do it." That was radical in 1836. It's less radical now. Think about it. We've shifted culturally toward prioritizing personal fulfillment. We tell people to follow your passion, to live your truth, to prioritize mental health and happiness. We're less willing to demand lifelong sacrifice for institutional roles. And in many ways, that's healthy. But, and this is critical, we haven't fully resolved the tension. We still expect certain people to sacrifice personal happiness for duty. Presidents, judges, military officers, police, teachers, we expect them to put service above personal desire, at least while they're serving. We get upset when they prioritize personal interest over duty. The pattern shows up in different ways. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from royal duties, some people said, "Good for them, prioritizing their happiness and mental health." Others said, "They're abandoning their duty, they're selfish." Same conflict, same fundamental question. What do we owe to the institutions and roles we inherit or accept? Here's what troubles me. We've never settled this. We want people to do their duty, but we also want them to be happy. And when those things conflict, we judge them based on our own values, whether we prioritize duty or individual fulfillment, rather than recognizing that it's an impossible choice. I find myself thinking about all the people facing less dramatic versions of this choice. The person who stays in a career they hate because their family depends on them. The parent who gives up personal dreams to raise children. The caregiver who sacrifices years to care for aging parents. We praise their sacrifice, their duty, but do we acknowledge what they've given up? Do we recognize that sacrifice has a cost? Think about the position we put people in. We create institutions that require sacrifice. We hand people roles with obligations they didn't choose, inheriting a family business, being the responsible oldest child, carrying on traditions. Then we expect them to be happy with the sacrifice. And when they're not, when they choose personal happiness over institutional obligation, we judge them as selfish. But here's what the evidence from Edward's abdication tells us. Forcing unhappy people to stay in roles they don't want doesn't serve anyone. Edward would have been a miserable king. He didn't want the job. He was bad at it. His abdication meant his brother, George VI, who took duty seriously, who understood his role, became king instead. In retrospect, Britain got a better king because Edward was honest about what he wanted. So as we think about that December day in 1936, when Edward VIII signed away his throne, I think the question for us isn't about whether he made the right choice. The question is about the impossible positions we create when institutional duty and personal happiness conflict. I respect duty. I believe in service. I believe you should do the right thing and make your parents proud. But I also believe in human goodness, in respecting every person for who they are, in recognizing that people aren't machines built to serve institutions. Here's what troubles me about the abdication crisis. Everyone involved was trapped. Edward was trapped between a role he didn't want and a relationship he didn't want. Wallis was trapped in a relationship that made her the most scandalous woman in the world. Baldwin and the government were trapped between constitutional requirements and practical reality. The British people were trapped watching their monarchy in crisis. Nobody had good options. Nobody got what they really wanted. The system, the machinery of a constitutional monarchy, couldn't flex enough to accommodate a human being wanting to be happy. Think about what that means for how we design institutions. Should institutions be absolutely rigid? Should duty always trump personal desire? Or should we build systems that acknowledge that people are human, that happiness matters, that forcing people to sacrifice themselves for roles often serves neither the person nor the institution? I don't have easy answers, but I know this. Edward's abdication forced Britain to confront these questions, and we're still confronting them. Every time someone leaves a job they're supposed to keep, every time someone prioritizes personal happiness over family expectations, every time someone says, "I can't be happy doing this, so I'm walking away," they're making Edward's choice. And here's what the investigator in me sees. We judge those choices based on the specifics. When someone leaves a job for a better opportunity, we understand. When they leave for mental health, we're starting to understand. When they leave because they're unhappy and want something different, we're less sympathetic. We still carry the expectation that duty should be enough. that service should make you happy, that sacrifice shouldn't feel like sacrifice. But it does. Sacrifice always costs something, and pretending otherwise doesn't honor the people making those sacrifices. It just makes them feel guilty for being human. I always come back to this principle. Respect every person for who they are. Edward was honest about who he was, someone who valued personal happiness over institutional duty. We can disagree with his priorities, but he was honest about them. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He didn't make everyone suffer through decades of a miserable king doing a job he hated. He made a choice, accepted the consequences, and stepped aside. Maybe that's more honorable than we give him credit for. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And here's why that matters today. Edward's abdication forced us to confront the conflict between personal happiness and institutional duty, a conflict we haven't resolved. We saw the same tensions with Princess Diana's unhappiness in royal life, with Harry and Meghan's departure, and with every public figure who chooses personal well-being over service. We keep creating institutions that demand sacrifice, then judging people harshly when they admit they can't be happy making that sacrifice. If we cannot remember that forcing unhappy people into roles they don't want serves no one, not them, not the institution, not society, we're condemned to keep creating impossible choices and judging people for making them. The question isn't whether duty matters. It's whether we're willing to acknowledge that sometimes the most honorable choice is to admit you're the wrong person for the job. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, think about the balance between duty and happiness, what you expect from others and from yourself, and whether we build institutions that acknowledge people's humanity or demand they sacrifice it. Because that's what Edward's abdication teaches us, not just about kings and romance, but about the price of duty and whether we're honest about what we ask people to pay. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.